We hear a lot about the Gen Z mental health crisis. But what if the usual headlines are missing a huge part of the story? Today, we're going to dig a little deeper, past the surface, to uncover the silent, structural pressures that are weighing on an entire generation. Okay, let's just start with the scale of this because it is staggering. Over 40% of Gen Z, so that's anyone between 13 and 28, they report feeling persistently sad or hopeless. And listen, this isn't just having a bad week. For millions of young people, this has become a chronic state of being. And it gets even more serious. Research shows that 1 in every 5 members of Gen Z has considered suicide. Now, a number that high isn't just a challenge. Let's be really clear. Experts are calling this what it is, a genuine public health crisis. And it's so important to remember, right? These aren't just statistics on a page. As one clinical psychologist put it, these are kids in classrooms, homes, and clinics. They're young people in our own communities, and they are carrying an absolutely immense weight. So the natural question is, why? Why is this happening? Well, the conversation often stops at a couple of familiar culprits. But to really understand the full story, researchers are saying we have to look much, much deeper. So on the left, you see the usual suspects, social media, the pandemic. And look, they are absolutely significant factors, no doubt. But on the right, experts are pointing to a deeper story. They're talking about the toxic, long-term stress that comes from things like structural racism, chronic economic instability, and intergenerational trauma. That's that emotional pain that gets passed down through families. Okay, so this brings us to a really key question. How do these big systemic issues actually show up in a young person's day-to-day life? Where do we actually see the impact? And it turns out, one of the most powerful answers is found in a role that most of us would never expect a young person to fill. We're going to zoom in now on a profound and largely invisible burden, the massive number of Gen Zers who are becoming informal caregivers. So what exactly is informal caregiving? Well, it's basically providing unpaid care for someone, often a parent, a grandparent, maybe even a friend, who just can't manage their daily needs on their own. And this can mean everything from cooking and cleaning to driving them to appointments and providing really intense emotional and sometimes even medical support. And the numbers here, they really reveal this hidden reality. According to recent reports, nearly 60% of all new informal caregivers are either Gen Z or Millennials. Just think about that for a second. At a time when they should be focusing on school, on their first jobs, on building their own lives, a huge chunk of this generation is taking on these incredibly demanding, unpaid roles. This massive responsibility creates what researchers have called a 5-fold strain, and it impacts nearly every single aspect of a young caregiver's life. So let's break down what that actually looks like. First up, the emotional stress, and it is just immense. We're seeing young adult caregivers with way higher rates of anxiety and depression. It's this constant state of worry, of dread, of helplessness. In fact, research shows they're even at a higher risk for PTSD than their peers who aren't carrying the same burden. And that constant emotional toll, it inevitably becomes physical. I mean, think about it. Chronic stress leads to terrible sleep, to higher levels of cortisol, that's the body's main stress hormone, and over time, that can cause serious health problems. It's this tragic irony, right? When you are completely focused on someone else's health, your own is often the first thing to go. Then, of course, there's the financial strain. The AARP found that young caregivers are spending a huge portion of their own income on out-of-pocket caregiving costs. And unlike older generations, they haven't had time to build up savings or a stable career. So every single unexpected medical bill just makes their already heavy burden that much heavier. The social side of things is also really profound. These caregiving duties can completely take over a young person's life, leaving basically zero time for friends or social activities. And that means they miss out on these really crucial parts of growing up, like forming relationships and building a support system, which can leave them feeling deeply, deeply isolated from their peers. And finally, this strain directly hits their future. Studies show that young caregivers often struggle with poor academic performance and are absent a lot more. Some are even forced to drop out of college entirely. Their whole career path can get derailed before it even has a chance to begin. Okay, so that is a really heavy picture, I know. But It's not without hope. And this is what's so important. By understanding these unique pressures, we can actually start to create better, more targeted pathways to healing. So where do we start? Well, one of the most effective tools we have is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's considered the gold standard for a reason. It's not just about venting. It's a really practical approach that actually teaches young people how to spot destructive thought patterns, how to regulate their emotions, and how to build real coping skills they can use for the rest of their lives.
But, and this is a big but, treatment can't be one size fits all. This quote from Sujin Lee, I think, just gets right to the heart of it. For many people, especially in communities of color, healing means addressing intergenerational trauma and a silence that goes back for generations. Standard talk therapy just might not be enough.
And this has led to some really exciting, more inclusive approaches. For instance, organizations like the Yellow Chair Collective are using culturally grounded methods that go beyond just talking. By bringing in practices like Tai Chi, sound baths, and breathwork, they create these healing spaces that truly honor diverse histories and identities. At the end of the day, though, healing often comes down to something incredibly simple. This is a quote from Victoria Birch, a young advocate who navigated the foster care and justice systems. And what she said just highlights the profound power of human connection, of someone just showing up without judgment, without asking you to prove anything. So this leaves us with a final crucial question. The statistics make it pretty easy to see this generation's pain. But are we seeing their burdens? The invisible weight of things like caregiving that are actually fueling this crisis? Because seeing that difference, well, that might just be the most important step any of us can take.